being a German in the United States when the Football World Cup was coming our way, I had to believe that I knew probably a whole lot more about football than just about everyone else in the market now. And maybe it sounded arrogant, but it was just my thinking there, right? And I probably wasn't that far off from it, to be honest. And so when I walked into the American Airlines interview, I said to them, guys, look, I probably know more about this sport than just about every executive you have in this room here. So you need me, and I love to work for you, right? And it worked.
Hello and welcome to the Ronny Leber Show, where every week we bring you fascinating guests with inspiring stories of success and overcoming obstacles from the world of sports, business, and entertainment. To support this channel, please subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and hit the like button so that we can deliver you the best content possible. He has been featured on CNBC, BBC News, and Bloomberg. Sports Business International voted him to the most influential leaders of the sports industry over the past 18 years. He's a founder and group CEO of Total Sports Asia. He generated more than $500 million in revenue, worked with Premier League football clubs, Formula One teams, the WWE, US Open tennis, as well as several Olympic sports federations. He's Asia's #1 sports marketing entrepreneur. I'm happy to have him on the show. Please welcome, here is Marcus Luer. Woo!
Thank you, Ronny. I'm happy to be on the show, and thank you for the kind introduction.
Wow. I'm happy to have you too as well, of course. And also, when you listen to your introduction, listen to all the accolades that you've accomplished over the last decades, what comes to mind to you?
That I've been around for a long time in this industry, I guess. And, maybe to some degree, if you're doing this for so long, maybe the accolades come with it if you work hard and do a good job. So maybe some of that just comes from just being around for, many decades.
Well, it absolutely seems like it. And you seem very humble also talking about that. When you look back, when you were a kid growing up in Germany, actually, what was it that you wanted to become as a kid? I knew you had a passion for tennis, you had a passion for football, as every German kid in a way who is interested in sports. But what was it actually that you wanted to become?
To be honest, my dream was always to be working in a large company. I went to the US from Germany when I studied and I did my MBA in the United States. So US was always a bit of a dream to be there and working for, the Coca-Cola companies of the world. As a marketing guy, that was sort of what I thought would be kind of fun. I loved sports. I was always doing sports as a kid. I never realized that there's ways to make money with it or as a career, to be honest. When I grew up, or when we were growing up, I think even the sports industry at the time was still in pretty niche area, right? It was sort of, unless you knew someone in it, you would have probably never even knew about it, how it operated, how it worked. Now it's a massive industry globally. Tens of billions of dollars are being generated there every year. It's actually a $500 billion industry as a whole. So it is large, compared to other industries in the world. But like I said, I had absolutely no clue that it existed when I was doing my MBA. I have a marketing degree, but while I was in the US, the Football World Cup, the 1994 World Cup, were being hosted in the US, and that basically got me in there, right? When you study in the US, they part of it is to do internships, etc. And I landed a very interesting one with American Airlines, which was at the time the official airline of the World Cup. And so, some of those stories have been already written about or talked about before, but that is how I got into it. Basically, one thing led to the other, and I ended up working at the World Cup in '94 in the US.
Let's step into that right now, Marcus, before we jump over.
Before we go too far.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Because I know that you came from Germany, and then somehow via Stuttgart and the World Athletics World Championships in '93. You landed also where you were sitting next to Joao Avalanche, who was at the time the FIFA president before Sepp Blatter, and also, of course, before Gianni Infantino. And so, and from there, you kind of came to the Gold Cup in '94, or no, '93, I'm sorry, where you were basically also had a very special moment in the Azteca Stadium in Mexico City. And somehow then you were the venue director of Dallas. So please take us through that. Everybody, you were just 26 at the time, I think, somewhere around that. So
That's right.
everybody who has a dream, and you're like, well, I'm too young or something, like all kinds of limiting beliefs that you have. And then looking at your story, it seems like a fairy tale. So walk us through that. How did it work?
Yeah. So, 93, I was 25, I guess. What happened, I guess, was, I being a German in the United States when the Football World Cup was coming our way, I had to believe that I knew probably a whole lot more about football than just about everyone else in the market. And and I'm not, again, maybe it sounded arrogant, but it was just my thinking there, right? And I probably wasn't that far off from it, to be honest. And so when I walked into the American Airlines interview, I said to them, guys, look, I probably know more about this sport than just about every executive you have in this room here. So you need me, and I love to work for you, right? And they sort of bought it, I guess. As I said, I was doing an MBA in marketing, so it's called a basic credential would kind of come with it maybe as well. And it worked, and that was the same way I got into with ISL, which was at the time the agency of the Football World Cup. Later on, obviously disappeared, but it was probably the single biggest agency in the world at the time, next to IMG, maybe on the other side of the business. So, one thing as usual just led to the other, and initially what I was doing with the World Cup was just being a volunteer. I'm just being the German guy. So when FIFA would fly into Dallas, Dallas was the headquarter of FIFA during the World Cup, actually in the US. They just called me in and said, Marcus, just come and help some translation, make them feel comfortable. And, why not? So, I was always a social kind of guy and hang out with them, right? And so that's sort of how one thing led to the other. And this, this crazy moment in the Azteca Stadium you're referring to, where I was as the representative of American Airlines, I was there. And I always, and there's a true story. My boss who was with me in Mexico, I don't think he even was in the stadium because I think he didn't care, basically. So I was there as the rep, sitting next to the FIFA, president and various other dignitaries.
And just to give an understanding, it was 93, where in the US, like many guys didn't even know how to spell soccer.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, exactly. At the time, really, there's few people who cared about it or really understood it, maybe what it meant. And so, though I'm in this huge stadium, the US plays, Mexico's playing the United States at the Gold Cup, and it was the American Airlines Gold Cup, as American Airlines being the title sponsor of it. And I was there as basically their main rep. They had the general manager for Mexico was there as well. And of course he was, way senior than I was, but, I was the guy from headquarters basically there. So long story short on that, we were on the pitch eventually, handing trophies and God knows what. And, I always say, like, if you don't get inspired by that moment and sort of believe that, wow, this is something I'd love to do for a career, and I always say this, I would have done this for free. I got paid actually decent money working there with American Airlines. But if they paid me nothing for it, I would have done it, right? It was just the most amazing experience. And I think that's sort of, I was hooked. I was like, okay, I've got to find a way to stay in this industry. And that's how I ended up working at the World Cup. And then I would say my first real job ended up then in Hong Kong, which we'll probably get to later. But yeah.
How did you then become the venue director of Dallas? Because that's quite for somebody who does not know what a venue director is. Like, you were the one responsible for the stadium in Dallas, basically, right?
Yeah. So I wasn't director; I was a manager. So there was other more senior people from ISL I was working for, and my job was, like with many others, to do certain parts within the venue itself. So my job was really on the pitch itself. So in the old days, you would arrange the A board still. You would liaise with the TV guys to make sure they look nice, and the certain letters are uncovered. During the match, you're in the stadium to basically look for any sort of ambush marketing, other things. You would liaise with just about everyone who needs some answers, or so I'd had walkie-talkies all over me, and basically burned to a crisp running around the pitch, basically. So it wasn't as glamorous as it sounds like, but it was a lot of fun, as you can imagine.
I can absolutely imagine that. And so take us with you. So how did then you come from Germany to the US, and then you ended up in Asia, and why did you also choose to stay there?
Right. Yeah. So The lady I was dating at the time was Asian, and clearly, so at the university in the U.S. in Texas, I studied at TCU, which is anyone in the U.S. would recognize it. We're one of the better football teams right now. We were just in the final of the NCAA championship, but at the time, as I said, this is a smaller university, and so so I met someone there. And on the back of it, I guess Asia started to get on my radar, and I started to get interested in it. And as much as I probably would have loved to stay in the US, just as I said, I really like the place. After the Football World Cup, there were probably 10,000 people who had something to do at the Football World Cup at whatever role or capacity. And everyone probably was applying at the same 10 or 15 agencies which existed in the country. And so nothing really looked that interesting for me. But I had sent one CV out to Asia, to, at the time, the Asian Football Confederation, or the general secretary who I had met again at the World Cup, who was Malaysian, which was, as I said, my girlfriend or ex-wife then, who she became later. So she came from the same country. So long story short on that, yes, the connections worked. I got a call from the agency who was representing the AFC's commercial rights at the time and saying, Marcus, we're looking for guys like you, come to Hong Kong and run the Asian Basketball Confederation for us, which is, basically the Asian version of FIBA, or the Asian counterpart of FIBA. And that's what I did. It sounded like a lot of fun. And again, that's what brought me here.
Wow. So basically, for everybody that actually is thinking about sports, and somebody who's working in sports and who also loves movies, might have seen Jerry Maguire. And I know that we both share a passion on this. I've seen this movie several times, and you stated that you watched it more than 20 times at least. And that it really represents your job, like especially help me help you. Like, how would you translate Jerry Maguire into real life, into your life?
I actually had the real Jerry Maguire on my own podcast.
Really?
There is a real Jerry Maguire. His name is Lee Steinberg, as I said, and he was on one of my recent podcasts. So the movie is based on his actual career or his actual role. So he was an NFL super agent, like Jerry is in the movie, right? Tom Cruise is in the movie. So in my case, we're not an agent, or what we did as a company has never been the player side of it as what you see in that particular movie. But the part which I can relate to and what inspired me, I guess, was, first of all, I've sort of stepped out of a, let's call it, reasonable, comfortable job at the time. It was the agency who brought me to Asia in 1997 and started my own company. So this whole concept of being on your own and now you have to figure it out, right? No one is giving you a check at the end of the month. Was very relatable to the movie itself. And then the whole concept of help me help you, or these sort of scenes which when he is in a living room and has to just now pull it together to get these clients in. Maybe my job wasn't in living rooms, it was in conference rooms or in board rooms, but it was, again, very similar, right? It was up to you then to make it work, to make it rain. And I was, when you start a company, and as I said, I've been an entrepreneur now for over 28 years, or 27. This is what you do, right? You are the leader of the business and you're the rainmaker. And that's sort of where Jerry Maguire, I guess, kind of comes into play.
Wow. And you already, of course, we already mentioned a lot about the sports industry. What, in your view, is different from the sports industry to any other, let's call it, normal business industry?
Again, the industry is small as large as it is, right? So as I mentioned earlier, yes, you do have we have $500 billion sort of the industry generates, and that's comparable to, it's 10 times the size of music industry. It's much bigger than Hollywood and many others, and even esports and gaming, which is about $250 billion industry. It's still twice the size. So it is a very, very large industry, but it is somewhat controlled by a reasonably small group of people. So getting into it, getting your feet wet, and then of course building your own name, reputation, and whatever business around it is not simple, right? As I said, it's not an easy access. Most people I've ever hired probably came through some introduction. Someone introduced us, or someone I knew who said, "Oh, my son would love to get in it. Can you give him an internship or other things?" And that's how really a lot of people get into it, right? It's quite a closed knit or closed door industry in many ways. But and maybe God knows why it is. I mean, I'm not saying there is a good reason for it, but it is hard to get in. Once you're in it, I don't think anyone ever leaves. It's just too much fun.
When you're talking about too much fun, because you also, one of the things is that you still, and I can relate to that. Also, having been in the sports industry, not as long as you have been, but still, it's an industry that is also, on the one hand, it's business, but on the other hand, there are a lot of emotions involved, and you also still get emotional watching sports. What are the greatest sports moments for you that really get you emotional?
Wow. Yes, I'm sure you read this somewhere where I said I get tears in my eyes watching certain things. So I'm a sucker for great highlight reels. So whether that is Michael Jordan, Michael Schumacher, Boris Becker, I mean, you name it. I mean, there's a whole bunch of people I could list. Watching them, the greatest. And I'm a football fan, of course, a German fan. When Germany wins major competitions, you shed a tear. It's a happy tear. But I already realized that when I was very young that I was quite emotional when it came to sports, much more than, let's say, watching movies or other things. And I always thought it was a bit funny. And maybe I was probably more embarrassed about it than anything else. So, but I think now it's pretty clear. It's something in my DNA which links to sports and the passion I have for the industry, for what we do as an industry, the joy we can bring, the distraction we bring, maybe in some sense, like my dad would always say, right? Is that the best in Germany? There's a saying there which I'll come to in a minute, but it's just it's amazing.
When you already said, you already mentioned that you were transitioning from basically from working for somebody else to working for yourself. When you were also talking about Jerry Maguire. What is the difference? Like, what's necessary? What skills, what traits are necessary in a person to actually go from being an employee to working for yourself?
Right. I mean, look, I said, I kind of probably fell into it in a way that wasn't always as planned as you'd like it to be. So when I left and set up my own company, Asia was hit with a very, very bad financial crisis here. It was as bad as 2008 around the world. That same happened here in 1997 in Asia. So we went from this great, brilliant idea of doing some huge deal with the Malaysian Football League at the time to basically nothing. We just couldn't pull it off anymore. There was no money, there was no financing, nothing in place, right? So we were looking to buy over the commercial rights of the league and then basically run the league from a commercial point of view, sponsorship, TV, etc. That was sort of the big plan at the time. Was fairly significant money we were looking to put into place. And then all of a sudden you're there and you have nothing, right? So for me, it was really the moment where you either go back to getting yourself a job and stick to what you've, maybe used to there at the time, or going, hang on a minute, I think I can figure this out and let me just give it a try. And then that's what I did. It was this sort of belief that I had something to offer, that we knew something, or I knew something, which not many people in Asia at the time knew. Now people call me whatever, one of the founding fathers of sports marketing in Asia, but that's not what you're thinking at the time, obviously, right? You just go and let's figure out how I make some money here to, put some food on the table. And it was brutal. Honestly, the first 6 months was not fun of when we started being in this crisis. So clearly there was very little money out there. The currencies have all collapsed, and so budgets were gone. So we had to be very, very creative, very, very thrifty. But we did survive. We got through the first year, and at the end of the first year, we made a little bit of money. We had 4 or 5 people working in the company then, and then we took off like a rocket pretty quickly after.
Before we go to the taking off part, let's stay there for a second, because you said we. Did you start out by yourself, or were you with a partner on the one hand? And also
I had a local partner in Malaysia who was a slightly older gentleman. I think he was about 10 years plus older than me. So he came from the advertising industry, so he had certain relationships and certain, contacts he was already bringing in, and I was the young, I guess, sports guy. And so we connected well, and we ended up setting up together. So yeah, I wasn't completely on my own. He was never involved in the business itself, so he was always just there as a silent shareholder behind the scene. But yep, he helped get the party started.
Wow. And it's great when you have somebody actually that also you can rely on, with somebody with great ideas, with somebody with knowledge, but you have somebody who's backing you on the other hand. And the second question that came to my mind was, you said that you knew something that hardly anybody else knew in Asia. Like, what was the business model at the time? What were you offering, and what did you know what nobody else knew?
Yeah, I think there was, again, it was probably more of a mindset rather than saying like, there are 5 things I know no one else knows, right? It was probably more sports marketing, as I said, was a it was still a new thing globally, right? If you go back into the mid 90s and you would go around even Europe or Germany, there was very, very few people who were doing what I was doing already. The US obviously had a certain edge to it, and maybe because I studied there, I felt, okay, some of that, whatever I took in there, even though my degree wasn't in sports marketing, right? There were no sports marketing degrees at the time anyway. That sort of, again, that came much later. But I felt that understanding the industry, connecting, what it means for brands, how they connect with the sports side of it, right? And how you leverage the power and the passion of sports for a brand the other way around. I think I had a pretty good sense for that, or some instincts, whatever you want to call it at the time, of how to do it. And then, like, many people do, I think we just dive straight in there, right? And we were thrown in the cold water. That was already when I first came here to Asia and worked in the other agency. I was thrown into basketball. I had no clue about basketball. My first jobs or my first events, which I ran with the other agency, was in Japan, was in Korea, was in the Philippines. I've not even been to these countries, right? Never mind understanding how to run a basketball tournament there. So all the stuff you literally just had to learn on the fly constantly. And I love that. I guess it just was something which I thrived in. And probably not everyone would do that. For me, in a sense, it was just an amazing opportunity. I just soaked it up and learned as quick as you could. And I guess I realized I was a reasonably quick learner. And on the back of it, we just kept building and creating new things. Every time someone said, "Hey, Marcus, would you guys be interested in doing this?" We just said yes. I mean, whether we knew how to do it or not didn't matter. We basically just, no, we'll figure it out.
So seize the opportunity. So if I understand correctly, and it's also quite in a way how I see my job. It's about emotionally connecting a brand with the audience. Is that correct? Like, is that like you take your client and you take what you have, like the sports, and then you find the bridge, you build the bridge. Is that the way you see it? Or
yeah, absolutely. I mean, let's take a real example, right? And which is probably one of the bigger ones we ever did as a company. So WWE wrestling, right? The crazy, I would say the crazy client. Yeah, it was one of it wasn't the first, but it was an early client, in early 2000. And WWE was a big brand in the US and generally well known around the world already. But in Asia, had very, very little revenue streams. And we're talking a couple of $100,000 maybe, which for them was nothing, right? I mean, they were already a much bigger brand in the United States at the time. So when we came across each other, and it was really a bit of a weird way, and I could spend another hour just, having funny stories of how that all came together. But let's leave that second. So when we started then to be appointed as the agency here in Asia, our job was really to figure out how to take this very, very American product and make it somewhat relevant to an audience here in Asia. There were fans, and we knew there were fans out there, but your average, TV executive in Malaysia or in India, in China or Thailand or Japan, they didn't care. It wasn't their thing, right? And so we found ways to relate it, first of all, to something he could relate to. And in many cases, it was their kids. The executive maybe was in his 40s or 50s, and he had a 15-year-old, 12-year-old son who probably was following it in some sort of illegal way, saw something on the internet or whatever at the time. And so we leveraged that. We gave him, T-shirts and other goodies. And he said, just take it home, and then, let's see. and it happened all the time that literally within a week or so, we got a call back after almost getting thrown out of the office from the guy by saying this sort of crazy American stuff, will never air on TV here, to go and, my son thinks this is the most amazing thing. And if, as I would be the super dad on the world if I would put this on TV. And this happened, right? And then as we started to get on air in a few countries, you have the usual domino effect, right? We started to be able to tell stories. We started to show that how they were monetizing it, how they were making money with it. The ratings were huge, and we just rolled with it, right? And as that the long and short story of it is, in the 8 years where we were the agency of WWE, we did over $150 million worth just in TV, and you add another couple 10 million here and there on top of it in a few other areas. So we did very well for them. We did very well for us. And that was really the start of TSA, growing with them. We were kind of known as the WWE agency at that time. It was an amazing platform for us, for them, and we had a lot of fun together.
Wow, I can imagine that. And I mean, WWE or wrestling in general in Japan, I think it has always been a tradition there. But is Japan in the Asian market a bit separate, or how do you see that?
Yeah, Japan, of course, Northern Asia, Japan and Korea are very different markets than many other parts of Asia. When we were going to Japan at the time, we were told that wrestling and fight sports in general was controlled by the Yakuza, which is the Japanese mafia, and therefore be extremely careful what you do. So that kind of scared us a little bit, but it didn't really deter us from our mission, I think. And that was actually our first deal we did for WWE in Japan at the time. It was, I think, about $6 million deal we pulled off with our very first deal. Now, the interesting part of that story is our budgeted forecast, and this was over, let's say, 2.5 years. So let's say a little less than $3 million maybe was the total on an annualized basis. Our budget forecast, which we had given to WWE, which they thought was already crazy and wild, was about that same amount for the whole region. And we did the same thing. We did this with one deal, with our very first deal. So to some degree, we'd obviously proved to a point that, hey, we know what we're doing. We had, I guess, underestimated even how big this could be. And after that, naturally, when you do this for your client, they're basically going, okay, well, just keep going. And that's what we did.
Did you yourself have a passion for WWE? And did you deal with Vince McMahon himself, or did you deal with somebody else? And also, and one more thing. Okay, no, let's start with those two.
That's a great question, and it's a funny answer. So when I lived in the US, I actually did not like it. I really couldn't get my head around the concept of it. So switching channels, I would probably watch it for 3 minutes and then move on to something else. So no, I was not a fan of it at all, but I had someone working for me who was a huge fan. And he started to sort of educate me a bit, convince me, Marcus, we should really have a look at this. This is so amazing, and it's maybe underexploited, etc. And once I started to understand the marketing side of it, the marketing genius of Vince and his team, of course, of creative people there, that's when it clicked for me. So it wasn't so much about, do I like what they do? And eventually, of course, you get, when you start to get the athletes, when you start to get the brand, you enjoy it, right? And I've been to many events. I went to WrestleMania and all these sort of fun things. But it was really just appreciating the power of storytelling. And this is how we sold it at the end of the day, right? It wasn't about this is wrestling or this is some funky sport thing. This is basically scripted storytelling, right? It's your soap opera for men. And that is what works. People, yeah, it's entertainment. People, and when I'm sitting in front of a media executive and I start using that language, besides then giving him a T-shirt for his son, that works. He can get his head around it now. This isn't another sports program he's buying here, but it truly is sequential programming, right? Each story, by the end of the WWE event or end of a WWE show, it kind of leaves you hanging the same way you would leave you hanging in another whatever your favorite soap opera, and then the next week it continues, and that is what sold it, and that's what people got their head around it. That is, oh wow, so I can build an audience and they'll come back, and they come back every single week, and that's what we did basically.
Oh, that's awesome. Very, very cool. And one of the biggest stars of the WWE, where I also know that you have a special story with, is The Rock.
Yeah, that's true. So Dwayne Johnson, that's right. Yeah, he was with us here in Asia in 2002, I believe. So after a couple of years selling media rights, we went to WWE and said, look, guys, we got this market is excited now. You are on TV everywhere, and we got to bring the show back here right now. At the time, just remember, WWE films every single week, right? These shows are constantly freshly produced. So for them to go on a trip, it's not as simple as it sounds like, because you have basically 5 days to get them in and out of into anywhere in the world, and then back, so that they're back in the studio or back in the arenas to produce the next season, right, or the next show. So we had this little tiny window, and I think it was literally 5 days, where we got them into Japan. Next day, we flew to Singapore and one more show in Malaysia, and then straight back. And I think they went probably back straight in filming on the next day. Right? I mean, they have brutal schedules. And he was on the show. He was, the superstar, of course, at the time, and the superstar for the event. And yeah, we had a funny little run-in, because it will take a bit too long when we go into it. But he had just produced his first movie, The Scorpion King, so he's also doing some stuff there. But it was shortly after 9/11, so everyone was very sensitive to come to Asia in 2002. And there were some exchanges, where somebody got a bit misconstrued in terms of what I said or what I called him, why he wouldn't want to come to Asia. And he pointed that out to me when we first met in the elevator, but we became friends right after.
He gave you the eyebrow. So
he gave me the eyebrow, and luckily he didn't give me the elbow. But it was.
Everybody knows The Rock knows what the eyebrow means.
Correct.
Wow. So from WWE, which of course is a huge client and a global client, but you also landed several others. Like how did it come along? There were, I know, Formula One teams. There were Premier League clubs like Manchester United and so on. Like how did it evolve from there?
Yeah, I think while we were then building this huge brand and or generating massive revenue streams for WWE, when you go to someone else and say, look, I've just did WWE, I made whatever millions of dollars, and they used to make a few $100,000 in Asia only, would that be of interest to you? That's not a very difficult story, right? Whether you go to the US Open Tennis, which ended up becoming a client of ours, whether we brought South American football to Asia, or certain other European football leagues, teams, clubs, that was still a different structure at the time than you have now. We were actually at one point, I represented the Italian national team. We represented the Spanish national team when they were the European champion, and the Italians became the world champion at the time. So we were, that time, some of these rights were still individually traded by these, rights holders. When you go to them and you say, look, we know how to make money in Asia, and we've done it now for various brands, and would that be of interest to you? And there's very few people saying, I'm not interested, unless they maybe have an agency already. Also, keep in mind, at the time, there weren't that many people on the ground here, right? IMG, of course, they were always here. They had always offices in Asia. But we were one of the few bigger agencies in the region which had a pan-region setup. We had at one point in time 7-8 offices across the region, from Japan to India to China, you name it, was 100 plus people here. So that network we had built, or I built, and with executives across Asia speaking the local languages. So yes, I was the white guy in the office here, and had a couple of others, international folks here, but the majority of my staff were all local. So we spoke God knows how many languages, and we really were the bridge. So to the Western world, I sounded like them, I looked like them, I studied at their places, if it was US, or I talked to the Europeans, of course, I am European. But out here, we looked very, very Asian. And I think that was our success story, for a long, long period of time, that we brought both of it, right? We understood what they needed, and we understood what clients here in Asia needed, and we were that bridge. And that's probably my role. It's been my role from the get-go when I came here. And maybe at the beginning, I probably didn't realize it necessarily, but it was pretty clear at the time that this is why people like working with us, why they understood what we're doing. And there are hundreds of stories of, bridging this West-East kind of scenarios where, dealing with someone in Italy, which is extremely passionate country, right? Or with a loud American, and trying to get them to do business with someone in India or in China or God knows what place, and just being the guy in the middle who gets screamed at on both sides, basically, because they think we're both, crazy, and we don't understand what they're saying. And we understood both of them, but they were just talking to each other, not just in truly different languages, but just had different mindset, different way of doing businesses. And that was our trick, bridging those things.
So also in a translative way, so to say. So also you were mentioning US Open tennis. I know that you're a tennis guy. You love Boris Becker. You were a ball kid even when you were a kid. And also, of course, Michael Schumacher, who was an idol of yours as well. And as a German, it's totally
That's easy to see.
understandable. And you worked with them. Like, how is that when you are working with organizations where you are like, and you already mentioned it before, like, I would have done this for free. Like, how does this then come out, and what stories come out of that?
Yeah, it's interesting. Actually, when I do business with them or any of them, I switch off my fan part. I don't even have a photo with Michael when I was with him in the office. This is Michael Schumacher. So, we did a really cool deal with him. And I had the opportunity to come and visit him in his office in Switzerland. And, you would think, at least by the end you walk out and say, can we have a selfie, right? And I didn't, God knows why. And now in hindsight, I regret it, of course. But yeah, I even with WWE or others, I wouldn't. You see I have to really dig around to find images with me and the wrestlers or others, because that wasn't my thing. For me, was when we do business, this is all about business. I'm here as your business partner, not as someone who wants a selfie with you to whatever. And social media in the early days obviously wasn't what it is now. So yeah, so for me, I love it. I'm excited as everyone else is. But I think I do separate those two things. And also, I think when you're too emotional, then maybe as you would be maybe as a fan, I think you kind of lose a little bit the let's call it the clarity of what you should be doing, right? And that's sort of, so for me, that I was able to do this hopefully in the right way.
Wow, that's beautiful, and I think it's also a great way to approach it. One last actually story that I want to touch on of the old days, because I know that there are many fans out there. Manchester United.
Yeah, I mean we've done quite a few things for Man United. It started in the sponsorship world, again outside of media rights. This is with another big space we spend a lot of time and generate a lot of money for rights holders. Globally is finding them sponsorship money here, and so we did several sponsorship deals with Man U over the years. But probably my favorite one is actually very recent. That's from last year, where we had Man United and Liverpool here in Bangkok for what became the single biggest football event ever hosted in Asia. And the reason why I say that, or I can't say that, is two. One is those two clubs, Man United and Liverpool, are the single two biggest football clubs from an Asian perspective. You might go another part of the world, maybe you have difference, maybe it's Real Madrid and Barcelona, but here in Asia, there's nothing bigger than those two brands. They have the biggest fan base and the biggest supporters, and everything you can imagine. That's one. What we paid, or what the promoter who I work with here paid, was equally larger than I know anyone has ever paid any football club in Asia. But also the money then generated, the ticket revenue and everything else was very, very, very large. And as far as I know, probably the biggest revenues ever generated for a football match out here. So it was a lot of superlatives. It was right after COVID, and COVID, when we negotiated, was still during COVID. So you can imagine that contract had pages worth of COVID clauses in it of what could go wrong or what would happen if this and that, and God knows. But it took us, almost a year, over 2 years to negotiate these things, because COVID got in the middle of it. When we started initially, it was actually before COVID. But it was all worth it. It was a lot of effort put in it, and it was an amazing event with 50,000 people in the stadium here.
Wow, congratulations to that.
Thank you.
And also, you've been very active, and we started about your beginnings a lot, about your beginnings in the sports industry, but you've been a serial entrepreneur. Like, you didn't just start one business, you started several businesses. So why do you actually, like, somebody who might not be in the entrepreneurial world might ask themselves, like, why do you need several businesses? Like, why do you start several businesses? And also, what are you focusing on right now?
Sure. Why do you start different business, or why did I start different business? I think there are a couple of things. One is, I realized quickly that I get bored with things if I do the same thing too long. There are people who are really good at doing the same thing over and over and over, and that's their thing. To me, it was trying different things and exploring new ideas and expanding the business in verticals which I felt had a relationship. So When esports and gaming started to become big, it just for me felt very natural because there's a lot of similarities to it, right? There are teams, there's content being generated, there are athletes, there are fans around the world, so very similar to traditional sports, right? So for me, it was just like, fine, that makes a lot of sense to be in it. When we created other things in a similar space, when we created branding opportunities in real estate, we stumbled upon it because a client was getting into it. But we also realized that the same way Coca-Cola uses the association with the Football World Cup or with the Olympics, why not a real estate company trying to build that same relationship? That's actually where we did a deal with Michael Schumacher and Maria Sharapova, and later on we did deals with brands like Armani and others, right? Sort of, let's call it high-end fashion brands. So to me, it was always just an evolution of what we were doing and using to some degree the same skill sets, but maybe in a slightly different, in a unique environment. And I like that, right? It's just maybe my creative side coming through and wanting to try new things. That's maybe the simplest way. But as we all know, not every business works, right? So we've had failures. It's just part of it, and you lick your wounds and you move and learn and move on from it. Coming to the point where you're saying what I'm doing now, right? So COVID clearly made a lot of changes for many of us. The industry was heavily affected in many ways. So when the traditional sports world started to slow down and events were not happening or played in front of empty stadiums, you go to someone and say, look, would you like to be sponsoring a football team or whatever? And they're not even playing, or there's no one in the stadium. Why would I do this? So it was pretty clear this is not going to work very well for a period of time. So, as I said earlier, at that time we were already looking at gaming and esports, which was booming because during COVID, of course, gaming and esports was still happening because you could do it without having to put people in the arena. So that became a big focus. And you see my, the jersey, the shirt I'm wearing here is Hubber. We launched a gaming platform here in Thailand. We own 6 esports teams now. We have professional esports teams here in Thailand. One is in the Philippines. So we're building a whole ecosystem around the gaming and the esports industry in this region, which is exciting. Southeast Asia is a big marketplace, right? It's over 650 million people. It's a young audience. The numbers I see is about 300 million of them like esports or gaming. So we got a big audience here. And so it's exciting space. So it's an obvious one why I'm in it in hindsight, but this is again something we built during COVID. That's one of them. The other one, maybe I'll keep going and then you jump in if you want to redirect the conversation. But the other one is with another completely different group of partners in the which come from the financial world and some from sort of similar backgrounds to myself. And this was always one bit of my dream, is to set up a fund or bring institutional money into sports, right? My job has been, as you said earlier, right? I've did $500 million worth of revenue for people. Our job was always find me the money, right? Or show me the money. And that's fun when you do it, bringing commercial revenue streams into it. But I always felt that there was other money out there, which, let's call it institutional money. And if you follow the industry now, when you look at what CVC or various other larger private equity groups are doing, that is the same I saw again about 2-3 years back when the idea first sort of started. So I brought, again, what I always do, try to bring people in together who complement my skills or add value to what I'd like to do here. And over a period of time, we started to define what we would do, how we would do it. And so that's the path we're on. The company's called Smurf Capital. And Smurf stands for Sports Media Right Financing. So we provide a certain type of financing for sports assets or sports owners, and that could be a football team in the Bundesliga or in the Premier League. It could be a Olympic federation, track and field, athletics, swimming or whatever. It could be an NBA team or God knows what, right? Or leagues around the world who are looking for capital without having to give up equity. That's the real trick here. So private equity obviously normally builds in equity components, which makes it a little more complicated because you're dealing now with valuations. What we're funding is revenue, right? We're taking a little slice of future revenue streams in return for cash upfront on the table now. So it's a very exciting space. As I said, we're still we have access to money, so we are starting now to deploy funds. We still, of course, constantly also still raising. Again, the dream is to bring this to $1 billion fund eventually, and that's
Wow.
maybe when I finally can retire in peace.
Marcus, so listening to all of that, I would say that your biggest gift is, on the one hand, putting your creativity and also connecting the right people together. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I'm a connector for sure.
Wow, beautiful. Talking about connecting and networking, how important is networking to you? I know that you are also in the YPO, you're also in the EO, like in the Young Presidents Organization, and in the Entrepreneurs Organization. How big is networking for you?
It's huge. If again, without knowing that, if you think of it, what I shared earlier, how I get into the industry, it was all about networking at the time, right? I just put myself out there and try to meet people, in Dallas, around the World Cup, etc., and that kind of led to these opportunities. And that has always been my way, my thing. I love LinkedIn. Before anyone really started talking about it, I was on it, and now I have 30,000 people on it, which is sort of the maximum you can do anyway. And so, yeah, LinkedIn is a big network. YPO is a massive network globally for me. It's 30,000 entrepreneurs, CEOs globally connected. And it's almost like if you study at Harvard and you have access to the Harvard network, right, in some sort of sense. These 30,000 people combined generate close to $2 trillion worth of revenue globally. So if you add that up, I think it's like the third or fourth biggest country on the planet. So it is a very, very powerful network with people which have much, much bigger business than I have. But I've been a member for over 15 years. Some of my closest friends are YPOs all around the world, and I don't think I could have done what I've done without the network, to be honest. The support part of it is massive.
Wow. For somebody who is just starting out right now and who would like to get into the sports industry, into the sports business, who would love to work in that field, what does this person need to bring, and what's the best way to start?
I mean, first of all, having a passion for the sport, for the industry, is always a good starting point, right? And that's probably one of my first questions I would ask anyone when you join us for certain roles. I mean, if you're coming in as my accountant or sort of a back office role, maybe it's a little less important how much you love sports. But if you're doing anything on the more front line of things, if you cannot talk about it passionately, if you don't get a bit excited, if then right, it's you're in the wrong space. So that's I think it just goes without saying, and that's maybe not difficult because a lot of people have a passion, of course, for sports, watching it, playing it, doing whatever they do. Getting into it, as I said, having now interviewed over 80 sports entrepreneurs from around the world who are now mostly C-levels or owning their own businesses, etc., on my own podcast, I promise you the number one way people got in it is internships. Just go somewhere, work for free, show what you can do, and doors open. So if you do this, and I can give you, I can rattle off hundreds of names now, or dozens of names here of people I've spoken to who started exactly in that same way, right? And so I think, to me, finding whatever, sending your CV out and trying to get a job right away. If you come from an extremely prestigious, maybe university, or if you have certain connections, or God knows what, you were an athlete before yourself, sure, there may be certain companies who look at that still and it would open doors. But there's nothing better than just saying, look, just give me anything. I just want to be in this here. Put me somewhere, and I want to show you that I know what I'm doing, and give me a chance. And we've had, not at the moment maybe, but over the years, we've had dozens of interns all over our offices, particularly in India. I always remember we had tons of really good guys who literally just came in and said, look, just give me a chance. And, many of them got jobs on the back of it. So I would say that's your way into the industry.
Wow. Amazing. Marcus, we're almost at the end of our time here together, and it has been flying. If people are interested, and where can they find you?
I actually have a website. It's called marcusluer.com. So that's always a good starting point to find me. If you want to email me, it's marcus@totalsportsasia.com. It's still the email probably I use most. And otherwise, I mean, there is, I'm on LinkedIn, as I said earlier, but although my account is pretty full there, so it's a little harder to connect with me there. But yes, I'm always open. I'm constantly have phone calls and sort of introductory meetings with folks around the world. who have ideas and just want to bounce things off, and I enjoy doing that. And yeah, I'm always here to either lend a helping hand, or, like I said, learn something on the other way around, of connecting the dots here, as we said earlier.
Beautiful, Marcus. It's very, very beautiful. And thank you so much for having been gracious with your time. Any last sentence you want to leave our audience with?
No, first of all, thank you for inviting me, and it was a lot of fun. Great questions. Always fun to reminiscent a bit in the old past. And look, as I said, they always say about, find something you have a passion for, and that's all. That's probably not 100% true, but in my case, it is true. I found the place where I had a passion for, and figured out pretty quickly how it also makes money and gives me a lifestyle I enjoy. And that is the perfect combo, right? I don't feel like working what I do every day, but as I said, nothing comes easy, right? Look, it all sounds a whole lot easier than it is at the end of the day, right? So it's a lot of hard work, a lot of hours, and a lot of sweat and tears went into this business and doing and building the relationships I've built. So, don't take it for granted that you just walk into it. You got to work hard on it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Once again, give it up, Marcus Luer. Woo!
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Ronny.
Thank you for sticking with us until the end. To make this content even more valuable for you, please leave a comment below and share your thoughts, and also share this video with somebody you care about who absolutely needs to see this. Thank you very much. Have an outstanding day and see you next time.